Hey Eric,
Hey, Tara.
how's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
Not bad.
I'm happy. I,
Ooh.
I had quite the adrenaline dump on Wednesday, and I just wanted to go to bed.
I
So
know, it was a long day.
I'm happy I got some sleep.
I'm glad. Me too. Yeah, it was a whole lot. This is a long week.
Yeah, and it's weird, like how this ends, and then we have both those briefs due, and it's
Yeah.
kind of like this mad race, and then it's done for us, but you guys have this week. It's a little calmer, I would imagine. But then, like, the craziness of when the briefs come in, you've got like 2 weeks or a week and a half. So it's always weird how, like, it seems to be, except for the hearings, it's just a little offset for us. Um, I don't know that when I always consider, like, when I'm like, oh, rate review is over, like, Laura and you are still like knee deep in it.
Yeah. It every day seems to be quite booked from now until like August
Really?
with
Yeah.
with things. But just the timing is kind of bad. Um,
You
I
know,
want to be careful, but
yeah. It's weird with, right when I get done and kind of get my head, it's during rate review, Sam is kind of shouldering hospital budgets by himself. And I like inevitably just like rate review ends and like maybe there's 2 days. And then I'm like, oh God, I feel super bad.
yes.
And Sam would, of course, be like, "Don't feel bad. It doesn't matter." But like, that's just not my jam. Um,
Right.
so it kind of feels like it jumps from one thing to the next, and then there's a little break, and then I guess the one care budget happens. So yeah,
Yeah, lots of fun to be had in the summer here.
all around.
Yeah, all around. But yeah, I don't do hospital budgets either, but it does seem to kind of, spread a vibe,
Yeah,
a busyness that makes everything, getting other things done a little tricky.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
I gotta let this dog out really quick.
Yep, no problem.
Come on, Bubba.
Hi, Charles.
Morning, Gary. How are you?
I'm fine. You're looking dapper today.
Thank you so much. You as well.
Thank you.
Got to dress up a couple days a year, right?
That's exactly right.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Gary, I like the artwork behind you.
Sorry, I had to find my mic. Thank you very much. My children. Would you like to buy one of the paintings, Mike? I'm happy to sell you.
I don't like it that much.
Thank you.
Well, good luck, everyone, on a long day. These days are long. Kind of hard to
Thanks,
believe
Mike.
that it will really take that long, but they really do.
You blame that on us lawyers.
Morning, Mike. I'm just checking my audio and video.
Morning, Chair Foster. We can hear you.
Great.
I think we're just waiting on Dave. I haven't
Okay.
seen him. Oh, I see Dave. Dave, you with us?
And Mr. Carnegie, do we have everyone from MVP here?
Yes, we do, Chair Foster.
Mr. Fisher, it looks like you're all set, right? And sorry, who's the court reporter today?
Hi, good morning. It's Michelle Morales. Oh, hold on. Let me say hello.
Hey, Michelle.
Good
You're with
morning.
us Monday too, right?
Yes, I was mentoring another reporter on Monday.
Right, great. Well, thanks for coming back.
Not a problem. No.
Ms. Morales, I'll call the meeting to order here in a minute. If you need any breaks or anything, as you witnessed on Monday, these can go fairly long. So if you need any breaks or anything, just email
Thank you.
Chris or someone on our side. Mr. Barb will be the hearing officer and run the hearing once I call it to order.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, I'll call to order the Green Mountain Care Board's hearing of July 24th. We're here today for MVP's hearing on its rate submissions. Our General Counsel, Mike Barber, has been designated the hearing officer, and I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Chair Foster. Ms. Morales, could we go on the record, please?
Yes, we are now on the record. The time is 8:04 a.m.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Michael Barber. I'll be the hearing officer for today's hearing. This hearing is being held remotely via Microsoft Teams. As Chair Foster said a minute ago, the purpose of this hearing is to take evidence and argument on MVP Health Plan Inc.'s 2025 individual and small group rate filings. The docket numbers for MVP's individual rate filing is GMCB-005-24RR, and the docket number for the small group filing is GMCB-006-24RR. The hearing is being held pursuant to Title 8 of the Vermont Statutes Annotated, Section 4062, as well as Section 2.307 of the Green Mountain Care Board's Rate Review Rule, Rule 2. We have all 5 of the Green Mountain Care Board members present this morning. We also have Gary Carnegie, Ryan Long, and Hannah Lebel, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Lebel, sorry.
Thank you.
From the law firm of Primer, Piper, Eggleston, and Kramer, who are here representing MVP. Representing the interests of health insurance consumers today is Charles Becker and Eric Schulteis from the Office of the Healthcare Advocate. The board's attorney, Laura Beliveau, is also with us, and she'll be leading the direct testimony of the board's contract actuaries from Lewis and Ellis, and may also have some questions for other witnesses as we go. We are recording today's hearing. We also have a court reporter here to transcribe the proceedings, and we will provide the parties with a copy of the transcript when we receive it. I want to just take a minute, because we're doing this remotely, to make sure we can all hear each other. So I'm just going to bear with me. I'm just going to do a roll call. And if I call your name, if you could please just take yourself off mute and confirm that you can hear everything okay. Chair Foster's all set. Board Member Holmes, are you all good?
Yeah, I think so.
Board Member Lunge
Good morning.
and Board Member Merman.
Good morning.
Morning. Ms. Beliveau.
Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Carnegie.
Yes, good morning.
Morning. And Mr. Becker.
Hello, good morning.
Morning. Okay, so if anybody has any technical difficulties as we go forward today, you can text me and let me know, and I'll pause the hearing while we try to get that sorted out. So I know the parties have my number already, but just for anyone who doesn't, it's 802-585-4829. If there are any members of the public here this morning, we will be taking public comment at the end of the hearing before we close the meeting. But it's really difficult to predict when that will be. So we have scheduled a public comment forum for tomorrow from 4 to 5, and that meeting will be dedicated exclusively to hearing from members of the public on both MVP's individual and small group rate filings, as well as the individual and small group rate filings from Blue Cross. Information about that meeting can be found by going to the board's website and clicking on the link for 2024 board meeting information. You can also access that information from the Department of Libraries homepage. And if you can't make it to that meeting, we do accept public comment in writing. So you can just write us, email us, and information on how to do that is, again, it's on our website. I want to spend a few minutes on the exhibit binders. So we received binders from MVP on July 18th. And then on July 19th, we received corrected versions of the exhibit list and exhibit 27. We also received exhibit 28, I believe, which was not initially in the binders. And then we received, I think it was exhibit 48. It looks like the documents, as with yesterday's hearing, the documents that contain confidential information have been identified in the exhibit list. And a little bit different from yesterday or Monday, sorry, the information that is confidential within those documents is marked with unexecuted redactions, I believe. So it should show up for you as a red box around the confidential materials. Gary, I believe that's the case. Did I misstate that?
I think that's correct. If you'd like, I can put on the record just to confirm what you said, but just going through the list. Would you like me to do that?
I don't think that's necessary, but thank you.
I believe you described it. And just for future reference, was the red boxes, is that how you wanted us to do it? You said it was different than Monday.
I believe that is what our guidance says. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know how we got to a different space with the other carrier, but so the exhibit list groups the exhibits. I just want to take a minute to go through this. So section 1 is titled stipulated exhibit list, and there are 3 kind of subsections, one for MVP, one for the healthcare advocate, and one for the healthcare advocate exhibits that are not included in the binder. And my understanding is that the parties have stipulated as to the admissibility of all of these exhibits in section 1. Is that the case?
That's correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. So I'll go ahead and admit those now. And then section 2 is titled non-stipulated exhibit list. And there's a subsection there for MVP that includes exhibits 28 through 31. And these were the subject of a motion to admit that the healthcare advocate opposed and that I denied. So those are not admitted. And then there's a subsection for the healthcare advocate with one exhibit, exhibit 41, which I understand is not stipulated, in which the healthcare advocate will be seeking to introduce at the hearing. Did I understand that right, Mr. Becker?
In full candor, in the past few days, as I've developed my witness outlines, I've determined I'm not going to use that exhibit, and I'm sorry for the trouble I put your staff through, Mr. Carnegie, but I'm not going to use that exhibit.
Nope, happy to hear that.
Okay, so the documents in section 2 then are not admitted in total, in full. And is there anything else we need to talk about with respect to the exhibits?
Nothing comes to mind.
So I know that the parties and the board members now are pretty experienced at this, but I just want to remind everybody at the outset that if you have questions about the material in the binders that is labeled as confidential, please don't ask those in the public session. You can let me know that you have questions about that stuff, and we can go into a non-public session to do that. We should have time for that probably in the afternoon. If we need to do that. So, anything else that the parties need to talk about before we move to opening statements?
I had one minor preliminary matter, and that is, I expect I'll have a few questions this year for Mr. Fisher, and that may go beyond, usually makes a statement or his direct exam, whatever you want to call it. And I think it makes sense to just, by stipulation, I don't call him as a witness in my case. Instead, I just be allowed to ask him those questions when he testifies at the end of the day, even if some of them may go beyond what he talks about. So I just wanted to raise that now so there's no confusion, and just would ask if we could stipulate to that.
I don't anticipate that being an issue from us. I mean, I think it's common practice for Mr. Fisher to be open to questions from MVP or from the board. I mean, I would just reserve. I mean, if the questioning goes way off, way off the mark, I might raise an objection.
I don't think it will go off the mark, but that's kind of the point of, do I need to call him separately to ask him questions? I don't think it's necessary. It'll all be around these issues of the hearing.
I don't think it's
And-
necessary either.
So if you're content, then if we just stipulate to that, that's what I would do.
Okay. I understand stipulation is to not having to call him as your own witness, but ask questions on cross. And if there are objectionable questions, we'll deal with it.
Thank you.
Okay. It's already hot in here. Okay, so We'll go on to opening statements then and start with MVP.
Thank you very much, General Counsel Barber. As we've indicated, my name is Gary Carnedy, and I work at Primer, Piper, Eggleston, and Kramer. And I'm here again representing MVP in these rate proceedings, along with Ryan Long and Hannah LaBelle from my firm. We recognize that the Green Mountain Care Board finds itself regulating healthcare in challenging times. Healthcare insurance regulation is driven largely by those larger healthcare challenges. The evidence will show that both MVP and L&E made prudent and necessary decisions to propose increased rates for 2025 to align with these healthcare costs. The evidence will also support findings on all of the statutory criteria. I would like to highlight 3 issues for the board to be listening for as it hears the evidence today. First, this evidence will show that L&E is recommending that the board increase MVP's rate proposals overall for individual and small group. Increase, not decrease. The evidence will show that no actuary is opining that MVP's overall proposed rates should be cut. Not the board's own actuary and not MVP's. MVP agrees that L&E's 5 recommendations on the overall rate adjustments are actuarially reasonable. Second, the evidence will show that precision on the amount of rate increase for 2025 is critical. Another year of losses for MVP in 2025 is not sustainable. We are a small state with only a few insurance options. The evidence will show that MVP is managing its administrative costs better than most carriers, in the first percentile of nationwide carriers as a percentage of premium. Administrative costs make up roughly 10% of the premium costs, however. And despite this high score on managing administrative costs that are within MVP's direct control, the evidence will show that losses over the last 6 years, including estimates for 2024, are in the range of $38.8 million. We welcome your regulatory involvement to turn this around so that MVP's Vermont product line is independently sustainable for the long haul. Regional not-for-profit plans need to remain profitable in order to serve the communities we live in. Third, in its decision last year, the board asked the carriers to provide more non-actuarial evidence going forward on how the proposed rates are affordable, promote quality care, and promote access to healthcare. With this 2025 filing and hearing, MVP is responding to that call. In prior years, MVP has provided substantial evidence of non-actuarial criteria in its pre-file testimony, in lieu of the extensive non-actuarial live testimony. In light of the board's request, this year, you'll hear more live testimony from Eric Bachner regarding steps that MVP has taken to make its insurance more affordable, promote quality care, and promote access to health care. We appreciate the opportunity, and just a heads up, consequently, Eric Bachner's testifying time will be expanded today as compared to last year in the MVP witness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
Thank you. So good morning. For the record, my name is Charles Becker. I'm a staff attorney with the Office of the Healthcare Advocate, representing the interests of Vermont healthcare consumers in this matter. Hearing Officer Barber, Chair Foster, members of the board, Mr. Carnedy. I'm sure most of us here today saw the headline in VT Digger about a month ago that read, "Consultant deems Vermont healthcare system badly broken." The article was, of course, about the Act 167 work being done by Dr. Bruce Hammery, which everyone here is amply familiar with, and I don't want to risk mischaracterizing Dr. Hammery's findings by taking one quote out of context. But that headline, which I read at my desk at work last month, poring over these rate filings, certainly was jarring. And the full quoted sentence was no less jarring. Quote, "The healthcare system in Vermont, unfortunately, is badly broken," end quote. So that's what the experts are saying about our healthcare system. What are ordinary Vermonters saying? One MVP customer who submitted a public comment about this rate filing said, quote, my MVP monthly premiums for my family of 4 cost more than my mortgage. When the advanced premium tax benefits dry up after 2025, which I have to assume they will, I'm going to drop coverage. It will be cheaper to pay for care out of pocket, which is depressing and utterly unaffordable and unacceptable, end quote. Can anyone here disagree with that Vermont mother of 4, that premiums, just the premiums for a family of 4 cost more than a mortgage on a house is depressing, utterly unaffordable, and unacceptable? You can really hear the emotion in that comment. And here's another one. Stop, please stop. The double-digit increases year after year are crushing people. My family plan has nearly doubled in costs the last few years. My salary certainly hasn't. Enough is enough, end quote. Vermonters have again come out in large numbers to comment on the rate filings. With the comment period still open, we've heard from more than 75 Vermonters already, and I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that not a single comment expresses approval of the proposed rates. No, Vermonters don't seem to be expressing any positive emotions about these rate filings, but they are expressing shock and dismay, disapproval, resignation, frustration, even bewilderment. Here's another Vermonter commenting on the rate filings. My monthly health insurance premium is the highest bill I have ever had. Higher than my mortgage payment, which includes taxes and insurance, higher than my student loan payment, higher than any car or other installment loan I've ever had. Why is the cost of health insurance so disproportionate? End quote. That's a great question. Really, it's the question that's at the core of this hearing. Why is health insurance in Vermont so expensive? And the cost of health insurance in Vermont is undisputably very expensive. We have some of the highest and fastest growing QHP rates in the nation. And how did that come to be? Because it wasn't always the case. The answer is highly complicated. It couldn't be distilled into an opening statement, and I wouldn't be the best one to try to explain it. But suffice it to say, there are a multitude of factors that contribute to Vermont's high health insurance rates, and only some of those factors can be influenced by insurers like MVP. Even fewer factors are within the insurer's complete control. Regardless, it is undeniable that Vermont health insurance premiums are high because we have high healthcare costs. As the insurers say, the premiums pay for members' claims. And in recent years, at least, despite pumping tens of millions more dollars into the system in premiums, it's still not enough. So it's clear that just throwing more premium dollars at the problem is not going to solve the problem. And while we can do clever things like silver alignment, which this year at least will allow people who purchase policies in the individual market to buy richer plans with fewer of their own dollars, it's all really just spinning plates, and at any moment it could all come crashing down. Indeed, there are signs that a crash may be imminent. So what are the solutions available to get us out of this mess? Let's turn again to what Vermonters have to say. Here's one comment, quote, I don't think rates should increase more than the cost of living increase of 3.2%, end quote. That's a reasonable idea. Similar even to the hospital budget guidance. But since premiums pay for claims, then we'd have to keep claims growth at 3.2%. MVP can't do that alone. With spending at hospitals under GMCB jurisdiction amounting to nearly 50% of claims, there will need to be greater pressure exerted on the other side of the equation to keep costs down, which, yes, is going to be a difficult thing to do when you also want to promote access and quality. But holding rates to 3.2% is not what we're going to hear today. What I expect we'll hear today from the witnesses is, first, we need to fully fund these proposed rates. Don't cut them. In fact, give MVP more than they asked for because, well, it looks like they've been underestimating their drug trend. As the representative of Vermont consumers in these proceedings, I won't encourage you to give MVP everything they asked for and more. I would encourage you to find some way to cut these rates. Here are 3. 1, have MVP assume hospital costs increase by no more than 3.4%, which is the hospital budget guidance. Then, of course, hold Vermont hospitals to no more than 3.4% cost growth system-wide. 2, require MVP to use their own medical utilization trend of 0.1%. And 3, require MVP to rely on their original projected RX trend of 7.4% in the individual market and 7.3% in the small group market. But let's be honest, even if you make these cuts and identify a few more, it's still not really going to make a dent in these increases. And come 2025, Vermonters, particularly in the small group, are going to experience significantly higher insurance rates. So I guess this is as good a point as any to wrap this up. In doing so, I will say these rate increases are a serious matter. The stakes are really high. Vermonters are feeling defeated and frustrated by what they're seeing in these health insurance markets. I suspect all of us here are. Yes, the board can do good things like silver alignment, which is a bright spot for people this year in the individual market. And yes, short of radically changing the system, we need solvent insurers in Vermont. And so premiums need to be sufficient to pay for claims. Let's hope over the course of this long day, we can give the board the information they need to carefully evaluate and balance the relevant factors. And let's hope there's real resolve to come up with the long-term solutions our badly broken healthcare system needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Mr. Carney, you can please call your first witness.
Thank you very much. That would be Eric Bachner.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Let me just take a second to pin you on my screen, and then I'm going to administer an oath. Mr. Bachner, do you solemnly swear that the evidence you shall give relative to the cause now under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, Mr. Carney, please go ahead.
Eric, first, I just want to test your mic there. Can you say your full name?
Sure. My name is Eric Bachner.
Can you turn that up in any way?
Is this better or worse?
That is better. Thank you. Eric, where do you work?
I work at MVP Healthcare.
Again, it sounds distant. My apologies, but I thought we should get this squared away before we go too far down the road.
Let me do this then. Is this better or worse?
That's much better. Thank you.
Sure.
So let's start over. Where do you work, please?
I work at MVP Healthcare.
And what is MVP Health Plan Inc., please?
MVP Health Plan Inc. is a non-for-profit subsidiary of MVP Healthcare.
And is MVP Health Plan Inc. the filer of the 2 rate filings this year?
That's correct.
And are you a member of any professional groups or associations?
Yes, I'm an associate of the Society of Actuaries.
And how long have you worked in the insurance industry, the health insurance industry, excuse me?
So I've worked in the health insurance industry since June of 2013, so approximately 11 years.
And of those 11 years, how many did you work at MVP?
I worked at MVP for approximately 9 of those 11 years.
And was there a period when you weren't working and then you came back? Describe that to the board.
Sure. So I went and worked at Cigna Healthcare for 2 years in 2022 and 23, and I came back to MVP in January of 2024.
Thank you. Have you worked on rate filings before the Green Mountain Care Board prior to this year?
Yes. So I've worked on approximately 40 rate filings that have fallen under Green Mountain Care Board jurisdiction. I've worked in various roles, starting with more technical roles, moving up to this year where I'm the first year as the lead actuary on the filing.
Thank you. And that would include the small and individual, small group and individual and large group filings?
That's correct.
What are your job duties at MVP?
Sure. So my primary job duties include being responsible for all of our commercial rate filings. So we operate in New York and Vermont. I'm responsible for the large group, small group, and individual rate filings in those states. I'm also responsible as the reserving actuary here at MVP. So I handle corporate reserving and incurred but not reported estimates. And then finally, I also work on commercial forecasting and what goes along with that, which is budget to actual estimates and comparison of budget to actual results.
You referenced IBNR. What is that, please?
Sure. So incurred but not reported is what IBNR stands for. It's an estimate of claims that are either have been received by MVP or have not been paid, or claims that have not been received but we are reasonably expected to have to pay for an incurred month. So as part of our statutory filings, as part of our GAAP financials, we have to include an estimate of what we think the claims will look like for any given month. And those claims take, in some cases, several months, even a couple of years to be fully paid. So we have to make an estimate every month to account for that.
Thank you. And in your work, do you review cost drivers and healthcare costs?
Yeah, that's correct. I primarily focus on the commercial line of business.
Thank you. And as part of your job, do you interact with other departments in MVP? And did you do so in your work in preparing for today in this filing?
Certainly. So specifically related to this filing, I've worked with numerous departments, including our sales and marketing department, our pharmacy department, our clinical department, and our product development department.
Are you an economist?
I am not an economist.
So what I'd like to do first, which I've done in prior years, and I think it's helpful, is go to the exhibit binder and kind of acclimate everybody to what we have there. So if you please go to your exhibit binder, and there's an exhibit list at the front, which you heard General Counsel Barber going through earlier. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
So exhibits 1 and 2, just bear with me a second. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 6 through 16, 24 and 25. That's the 2 rate filings for individual and small group, and all of our interrogatory objection responses. And you're familiar with all of those?
I am.
And you'd adopt those as your testimony, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that would include the confidential versions that have the red boxes around them, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then exhibit 5, that's the expert witness disclosure, correct?
That's correct.
And then as your CV attached to it, and you prepared that CV and are familiar with it?
I did.
And then exhibit 16 is your July 12th pre-filed testimony.
That's correct.
And you've reviewed that and are familiar with it. And it also includes some confidential information in the red boxes, correct?
That's correct.
And then exhibits 17 and 18, those are the 2 July 12th letters from DFR on solvency for our 2 filings, correct?
That's correct.
And you've reviewed those and are familiar with them.
I have.
And then next we have exhibits 19, 20, and 21. These are Lewis and Ellis exhibits, the July 12th actuarial memorandum for individual and small group, and Jackie Lee's pre-filed testimony of July 12th. You see that?
Yes.
And you review those and are familiar with them, correct?
I have. That's correct.
And next, continuing on our list, you go to exhibits 22, 23, 26, and 27. That's 22 is the MVP carrier calculation of July 15th. 23 is the July 16th notice of disagreement, which we file as a supplemental pre-filed. Exhibit 26 is MVP's updated rate increase summary table. And Exhibit 27 is MVP's Vermont Historical Rate Cut Summary. Are you familiar with all of those, and did you help prepare those?
I did, yes.
Next, we have going to Exhibit 48. That's a July 5th, 2023 L&E actuarial opinion. That's from last year, their opinion from last year, and it just has section 12 on contribution to reserves, page 1, and then 17 and 18, which is that section. Are you familiar with that document?
Yes, I am.
And you've reviewed it, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So these exhibits we've just reviewed, the ones that are MVP exhibits, you adopt them as your testimony in the case, correct?
Yes, I do.
And then going to Exhibit 1, please, by way of example. Exhibit 1, the first page, you'll see, assuming you have a color copies in your binder, direct the board, there's a number in the bottom right-hand corner, page number 1. Do you see that?
Yes.
So when you and I are talking in your direct examination, I'll be referencing page numbers, and I'll try to reference those, we call them Bates numbers, as we go along, so you can follow. Okay?
Okay.
So let's then turn to the substance. We're going to start first at a high level, and I'd like to start by going to just focus on the numbers, and then we'll talk about the substance and the issues after that. Starting with the numbers, go to Exhibit 1, please.
Okay.
And go to page 2, please.
I'm there.
And you see in the top left-hand corner, it says general information.
Yes.
And do you see there's an overall rate impact reference and a number? Could you read that, please?
Sure. The overall rate impact for this filing was 11.68%.
So this is the individual filing that was filed back on May 13th, 2024, correct?
That's correct.
So 11.68 is what MVP was originally seeking, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. And go to Exhibit 2, please. This is the small group filing of May 13th, correct?
That's correct.
And if you go to page 2, please. Same spot, general information, left-hand corner, overall rate impact. What does it say, please?
So the overall rate impact for the small group filing as of May 13th was 9.34%.
Okay, and that's sort of the average premium rate, correct?
Yeah, that's the premium weighted average increase of all of the plans that we're proposing to sell for 2025.
Thank you very much. Next, I would ask you to go to Exhibit 19, please. Exhibit 19. Let me know when you're there.
I am there.
This is the July 12th L&E actuarial memorandum as it relates to the individual rate filing, correct?
That's correct.
I want to ask you to go, please. They have a nice page that has a list of recommendations. It's on page 19. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
Would you read the last sentence on that page?
Sure. The last sentence says, after the modifications, the anticipated rate change for the individual market is roughly 15%, plus any impact from updated hospital budget information.
So MVP original filing was 11.7, and here L&E is recommending going to 15, subject to any impact on the hospital budgets, correct?
That's correct.
So the hospital budgets aren't part of that number at this point, correct?
That's correct.
Next, I'd ask you to go to Exhibit 20, please. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
So this would be the small group rate filing actuarial memorandum of L&E dated July 12th, 2024, correct?
That's correct.
And go to page 17, please.
I'm there.
Read that last sentence, please.
After the modifications, the anticipated rate change for the small group market is roughly 11.6%, plus any impact from updated hospital budget information.
So MVP as the small group starts out in May at 9.3%, and L&E in July is recommending 11.6%, not including anything relating to the hospital budgets, correct?
That's correct.
If you go back to, please, Exhibit 19. And go to the recommendations page. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
Okay, so this is for the individual filing. There are 5 recommendation bullets, correct?
That's correct.
So before we get into the substance of those, I just want to walk it through so the board can follow you on where we have agreement and where we don't. Okay?
Okay.
So the first item, Brattleboro Retreat budget. Do we agree with, well, first of all, what does L&E say about this issue, and do we agree?
Sure. L&E identified a technical issue with our rate filing and how it relates to the trend that was applied for Brattleboro Retreat, and MVP does agree with this recommendation.
And that didn't have a material impact on the rate, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. And the second issue, would you read that sentence, please?
Sure. Once 2025 hospital budget requests are submitted, L&E recommends that this new information be considered in the unit cost assumption.
And does MVP agree with that recommendation?
We do.
And then the third issue, that's about RX trend, correct?
Yes. So
And-
MVP, oops, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, please.
L&E identified an issue with MVP's historical pharmacy trends as it applies to the filing, and MVP agrees to this recommendation.
Thank you. And then the fourth item, House Bill H766.
So MVP provided L&E with data regarding how Bill H766 will impact the filing for 2025. MVP agrees with the recommendation of L&E.
And that would result in the increase. Well, why don't we hold off on the numbers? Okay, so we have agreement on that. And then the fifth one, please.
Sure. So L&E expects carriers to reflect updated risk adjustment transfers when they are final, and MVP agrees with this recommendation.
Okay, so of the 5 recommendations, how many do MVP agree with?
All 5.
And that relates to the individual filing, correct?
That's correct.
And is it true that the only difference would be some required mathematical true-up that you'll be testifying about later?
That's correct.
And we don't know yet. You'll be testifying later about the hospital budgets and the numbers, the impact on the rates. We don't know yet if L&E will agree to those calculations, correct?
That's correct.
So this year, as to the individual filing, we don't have any substantive disagreement with L&E, correct? Subject to the hospital budget issue.
That's correct.
You go to Exhibit 20, please. Page 17.
I'm there.
Would you agree with me? It's the same 5 recommendations. The numbers may be slightly different, but it's the same 5 issues and recommendations, correct?
That's correct.
So this year, on the 5 recommendations made by L&E, how many does MVP agree to?
We agree to all 5 on the small group as well.
And it would be, the only difference would be some required mathematical true-up, and then it remains to be seen on the hospital budgets. That's still outstanding, correct?
That is correct.
Overall, the board's actuaries at L&E are suggesting an increase in the proposed small group rates, correct?
That's correct.
And today, I'll be using Exhibit 19 as we walk through the various issues, which is the individual filing. But I'm going to presume that your testimony applies to both individual and small group unless you tell me different. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Would you go to Exhibit 22, please?
I am there.
Would you identify the document and the date of the document, please?
Sure. This document is dated July 15th, 2024, and it is MVP's calculation of L&E's actuarial memorandum rate impact.
Thank you. And this document doesn't reference or speak to the hospital budget issues, correct?
That's correct. Just the 4 issues that L&E explicitly made a recommendation about.
Okay. And is this something that L&E asks for each year from MVP?
That's correct.
And why is that? Why do we do the calculation for them?
Yeah, so we provide a ton of things to L&E in terms of our rate filing, but they don't have full insight into every piece of our calculation. And so L&E usually uses very broad numbers in terms of how they analyze the impact of specific items. But then they trust us with plugging in their recommendations and seeing how the recommendations are actually impacted in our rate filing.
And don't we have like the rate filing software that does this with better precision?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. So let's go through this. Would you walk me through each item and read it and then just tell me what it means?
Sure. So the first item is the Brattleboro Retreat budget increase. MVP agrees that these corrections would have no material impact on the requested rates. The second one is RX trend. MVP agrees that the updated pharmacy trend would result in a 1.2% increase in the individual filing. For the small group filing, L&E states it would result in a 1.5% increase. However, MVP has calculated a 1.4% increase.
So let me interrupt you there. So is that an example of where when we ran through the numbers, there was a true up there?
Sure. And I have to be clear that oftentimes we're talking about less than 0.1%, right? So a 1.5% increase may be 1.46%, and MVP calculated at 1.44. So these are not substantial disagreements in terms of substance.
Thank you. Okay, keep going.
Sure. So the third bullet point is impact of H766. MVP agrees that the adjustment would result in a 0.9% increase in the individual filing. For the small group filing, L&E states it would result in a 0.9% increase. However, MVP has calculated a 0.8% increase. And the fourth bullet point is updated risk adjustment, where in the individual filing, L&E states that the updated risk adjustment would result in a 0.9% increase. However, MVP has calculated it to be a 0.8% increase. For the small group filing, L&E states it would result in a 0.3% decrease. However, MVP has calculated it at a 0.2% decrease.
And then the totals, please.
Sure. So the last bullet point is a total rate change, and it says with all of these adjustments, L&E calculated a new increase of 15.0% for the individual filing. However, MVP calculated the new increase as 14.9%. L&E calculated a new increase of 11.6% for the small group filing. However, MVP calculated the new increase of 11.5%.
Okay, so before the hospital budget consideration, those are L&E's numbers, correct?
That's correct.
And as of July 15th, before we looked at the hospital budget considerations, we agreed with those numbers, correct?
That's correct.
As modified in Exhibit 22, correct?
That's correct.
Would you go to Exhibit 23, please?
I am there.
And would you identify the document?
Sure. So this document is MVP's supplemental pre-filed testimony from myself regarding the notice of disagreement with L&E.
And would you read On page 3, there's an answer 5, which, as I understand it, is summarizing the figures we just talked about. Would you please read it, and then I have a question for you.
Sure. So answer 5 says that MVP's requested average rate increase for the individual filing of 11.7% is increased by 2.9% for a modified total average rate increase request of 14.9% by MVP. MVP's requested average rate increase for the small group filing of 9.3% is increased by 2% for a modified total average rate increase request of 11.5% by MVP.
And that last sentence you just read, when I look at it, there's a 9.3, and if you add the 2 to it, that would get you to 11.3, not 11.5 if you just do straight math. So could you explain how this is calculated?
Sure. So I use the example of your mortgage payment or your car loan. I guess that's a little bit more depressing. So on the positive side, you could use your savings account. If you have a certain chunk of money in there and you increase it by 2%, the part of the money is multiplied by 2%. So if you have $1.09 in your savings account and you increase it by 2%, then you have not $1.11, but $1.11.
So the response in A5 that you just read, as of the date of this document, July the 16th, as of that date, that was the rate that MVP was seeking, basically agreeing with L&E had recommended, correct?
Yes, this notice of disagreement did not actually disagree with anything that L&E put forth.
Thank you. Would you go back to Exhibit 19, please?
Sure.
And go to page 19 of Exhibit 19?
I'm there.
Okay, so I want to go through each of these items and now talk substance. So let's start with the first item, please. What is that all about?
Sure. So L&E identified that MVP was not using the Green Mountain Care Board approved trend for Brattleboro Retreat, which has come under Green Mountain Care Board jurisdiction. MVP agrees that that is the case, and we plugged in the Green Mountain Care Board approved trend for 2024. The reason why it has no material impact on the rates is, for one, the difference between MVP's assumed trend and the Green Mountain Care Board approved trend was only a couple of points, and there are not a lot of claims in each of the filings at Brattleboro Retreat, so the ultimate impact is 0, rounded to a few decimal places.
Thank you. And the second item, the hospital budgets. The first clause says once 2025 hospital budget requests are submitted. Do you see that?
Yes.
And so after L&E's Exhibit 19 on July 12th, the hospital budgets were submitted, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so would you please go to Exhibits 24 and 25? We'll start with 24.
I'm there.
And if you look at Exhibit 24, the very first page, this is a July 17th objection letter that MVP is responding to. So it's from L&E, correct?
Yeah, L&E sent the letter on the 15th, and MVP responded on the 17th.
And this is about the hospital budgets.
That's correct.
Would you please read question 1 and then the A, B, and C?
Sure. So question 1 says, please provide the rating impact of assuming each of the following scenarios. A, hospital budgets are approved as recently submitted. B, hospital budgets are approved at 0 unit cost change for fiscal year 2025. And C, hospital budgets are approved at a uniform 10% unit cost increase for fiscal year 2025 for all facilities.
Okay. So those are 3 different scenarios that they're asking you to plug numbers in on, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So when we originally filed our rate filings in May, what was the plug-in as to hospitals?
Sure. So we did not have, obviously we did not have hospital budget information for 2025 at the time of our rate filings in May. So what we assumed was the Green Mountain Care Board approved rate increase for 2024, apply that to 2025. So to use an example, if a hospital was increased by 4% for 2024 over 2023, we then also assume that they would go up by 4% for 2025 over 2024.
Okay, so basically what happened last year, you applied to this year, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so A would be what they're requesting this year, what the hospitals are requesting this year, correct?
That's correct.
And B, what is B again?
Sure. So B says that hospital budgets are approved at 0 unit cost change for fiscal year 2025. So that would be, rather than assuming the same increase, whatever the hospital got as a rate in 2024, it would not increase by anything for 2025.
And then C is a 10% increase?
That's correct.
And then if you go to Exhibit 25, please.
I'm there.
You see, this is this the same letter, just as a small group? And I understand the numbers may be different.
Yeah, that's correct. The numbers are slightly different because each filing has different weights in terms of what hospitals are utilized by the population.
So going back to Exhibit 24 then, please.
Okay.
Would you read the first sentence, which is the response? Read the first sentence in the response as it relates to A, B, and C.
Sure. The impact of scenarios A, B, and C on the total rate increase are 0.5%, negative 2.3%, and 2.7% respectively.
Would you explain that, why there's a positive and a negative, and just give your actuarial view on that?
Sure. So scenario A points out the fact that the hospital proposed budgets for 2025 are higher than the approved budgets for 2024. So if we were to move from the proposed rate increase, the approved rate increases in 24 to the proposed rate increases in 25, it would increase the rate by 0.5%. Scenario B is a negative adjustment because the hospitals are going from what we assumed was something greater than 0 to 0%. And then scenario C is an increase because we assumed the hospitals would go up by something less than 10%. And if they go up by all 10% across the board, it would increase the rates.
Thank you. And then would you go to Exhibit 25, please?
Sure.
And same thing, would you read that response, the first sentence, please, and explain it?
Sure. The impact of scenarios A, B, and C on the total rate increase are 0.8%, negative 2%, and 2.8% respectively. So once again, as I said before, these numbers are different because there's a different utilization mix among hospitals at each of the filings, but all of my comments regarding scenarios A, B, and C on the individual side would apply here as well.
Thank you. Would you describe for the board, I think they're familiar with it, but the timing of the hospital budget hearings and the challenges that causes?
Sure. The timing of the hospital budgets is difficult for MVP because obviously the hospital budgets for 2025 are not even proposed until a week before the rate hearing, and they're certainly not approved before our final rates are approved. That presents a challenge because we don't fully understand what the unit cost increases are going to be for 2025 when we file and have our rates approved. So MVP urges the board to align whatever unit cost increases are ultimately going to be approved in the hospital budgets with the rate filing.
Thank you. I think we've got all that testimony, the words you were saying, but your screen did kind of stifle up a bit. We'll keep our eye on it.
Okay.
I'm going to ask General Counsel Barber, were you able to hear all of that? Thank you. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And then as it relates to these numbers we just went over in Exhibit 24 and 25, and the choice ultimately that the board will make on the hospital budgets, what is your concern as it relates to this rate filing and the hospital budget hearings that come after this?
Sure. So MVP's concern would be that the Green Mountain Care Board would approve a hospital budgeted rate increase in the rate filings and then approve something higher than that for the hospital budgets when they are approved in September. That would cause a disconnect between the rates that are ultimately charged and the claim cost and would put MVP at a disadvantage.
So MVP could get caught short in the amount of premium they charge as it relates to what the hospitals are allowed to charge, correct?
That's correct.
So what would the goal then be to limit that as much as possible?
Yeah, the goal would be to align whatever is approved in the rate filing with what will ultimately be approved in the hospital budgets.
Thank you. Let's go back to Exhibit 19, please. Exhibit 19. And the third item, which was the RX trend. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
Would you please tell us what this is about?
Sure. So historically in our rate filings, MVP has relied on our pharmacy benefit manager to help us understand pharmacy trends and apply those trends in our rate filings. The understanding is that they know the pharmacy market much better than we do. So they provided us with utilization trends, their understanding of unit cost increases, which are in some sense a projection based on manufacturer cost increases and new drugs coming out to the market. So we've historically relied on those trends. L&E undertook a study to look at our historical data, our historical actual observed trends, and how they compare to our proposed trends for the past few rate filings. And what L&E has found is that our actual observed trends are higher than what we have proposed in terms of pharmacy trend in the last few filings. So L&E has proposed an equal weight between historical trends that have been seen and our PBM's projected trends in terms of our actual approved pharmacy trend in this filing. And MVP agrees to that recommendation.
And did you find L&E's recommendation actuarially reasonable?
Yes.
Let's go to the next bullet then, please. House Bill H766. Would you please, I think the board's familiar, but if you wouldn't mind, tell us what this is about.
Sure. So House Bill H766 was signed into law, then was amended with another bill that delayed some of the provisions that were set to be included in 2025. There were some provisions that are still left, and there's our restrictions on prior authorization, claims prepayment reviews, and prescription drug step therapy. So MVP analyzed the portion of the legislation that will be going into effect for 2025. We expected that rate increase to increase by either 0.8 or 0.9%, depending on the filing. We provided those numbers to L&E, and L&E is agreeing to those. So in some sense, L&E is agreeing to, or we are agreeing with what L&E agreed to that we originally presented.
You said agreed a lot in that last statement there. Very good.
That's correct.
Does the bill relate, we don't need to go into great depth, but how does it relate to prior authorization?
Sure. So prior authorization is a tool that health insurance companies have historically used in order to gain or to have the members and the providers gain authorization to perform certain services. It's a way for insurers to control costs and delay or defer unnecessary utilization.
And does the bill do anything about step therapy, and what is that?
Sure. So step therapy is another tool that insurers have historically used, where we've said you must utilize a certain type of drug or a certain brand or generic version of a drug prior to utilizing a higher cost drug, with the goal that some positive outcomes will be seen with the original treatment, and therefore the higher cost drug will not need to be utilized.
Okay. And what about prepayment review?
Yeah, so this is, we're in some cases, insurers are allowed to amend parts of a claim prior to it being submitted and paid by the insurer. So it's an upfront adjustment rather than a retrospective claim adjustment.
So going back then to the description of the House bill at bullet 4, these are choices that the Vermont legislature and the governor ultimately made about these 3 items, correct?
That's correct.
And it resulted in an increase of premium, correct?
Yes, it will result in an increase to claims and an increase ultimately to premium.
Let's go to the next item, please.
Sure.
Would you identify what risk adjustment transfers are and how that applies this year?
Sure. So risk adjustment transfers are a program that was instituted as part of the Affordable Care Act, and they apply to small group and individual insurance companies in each of the states. And the function of the risk transfer is to transfer money from carriers with better risk to carriers with worse risk. So all the members for both carriers or all carriers within a given state are scored a risk score based on their demographics, based on their plan design, based on their conditions that they've observed within the year. Those risk scores are compiled together, and carriers with a lower risk score, or what is perceived to be better claim risk, have to pay money to carriers with worse claim risk or higher risk scores. And so the problem with the risk adjustment formula, again, is that the risk adjustment transfers for 2023 are not finalized until it was delayed by a couple of weeks. It was just on Monday. So MVP and all the carriers within a market don't have full insight into the 2023 risk adjustment results when they file. In this case of the state of Vermont, we worked with an actuarial consultant who was given data from both carriers, and they were able to estimate what the risk adjustment results would ultimately look like. Now, that data is not complete. It does not have full run out, and they have to make some assumption for how the claims will ultimately run out. So that's the basis of MVP's risk adjustment assumption in our rate filing. Subsequent to that, L&E took the full complete data from both carriers, ran it through their model, and determined what the final risk adjustment result will be, which ultimately tied to what was released on Monday. And so this recommendation is just to true up the estimated risk adjustment transfer to the final risk adjusted transfer.
Thank you. I want to shift gears and talk about long-term sustainability. So let's go to Exhibit 27, please. Exhibit 27.
I am there.
Not yet. Will be. Okay. If you look at Exhibit 27, it's entitled Vermont Historical Rate Cut Summary, correct?
That's correct.
And you see how this year we put numbers in the columns 1 through 10?
Yes.
So what I'd like you to do is go through the columns and just describe what it's showing, and then we can talk more substance after that, okay?
Okay. So column 1 labels the market and the year for the 6-year time period from 2019 to 2024. Prior to 2022, the markets were combined. 2022 through 2024, the markets are separate. Column 2 is the profit load that was built into the rates. This was MVP's filed risk margin in each of the filings. Column 3 is the overall cuts that were proposed by L&E. So these are cuts that MVP did not stipulate to. They were things like COVID vaccine assumptions or assumptions as they relate to utilization trend that MVP did not agree with. Column 4 is additional overall cuts by the Green Mountain Care Board. These include things like cuts to risk margin and explicit premium cuts in the name of affordability.
And those would be on top of the cuts in column 3, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, those two are multiplicative. Column 5 is the total allowed premium by the Green Mountain Care Board. This is our earned premium for each year for each market after all of the cuts were made. Column 6 is MVP's losses. So this would be equivalent to our operating income for each of the filings for each of the years. Column 7 is the L&E cut impact. So it's effectively applying column 3 to column 5 and determining what the amount of lost revenue was from the cuts that were proposed by L&E. Column 8 is the board cut impact. So this is, again, taking column 4 this time and applying it to column 5 and determining what the revenue loss was due to overall cuts by the board. Column 9 is the total dollar impact of the rate cuts. This is the summation of column 7 and column 8. And then column 10 is losses without cuts. This is what MVP's losses would have been should columns 8 and column 9 not have been there. It's the addition of column 6 and column 9. Excuse me, the difference, column 6 minus column 9.
Thank you. And would you, before we dig into the numbers, would you explain to the board the 2024 numbers and I believe to some extent the 2023 numbers?
Sure. So I could take a step back and say that we expect that 2022 and prior are reasonably certain to be complete. We may still have a high cost claimant or somebody come in for 2022, but all of the risk adjustment and everything has been settled for those years. For 2023, this was our best estimate of operating income at the time of this, when this document was created. There are still some outstanding items. We do still have a little bit of claim reserves, expect some run out of claims, expect things like risk adjustment to still come in. And then 2024 is still just a very high level projection. Obviously we don't have, we only have claim expense for the first 6 months of the year. Even that claim expense is not very complete. We have to apply IBNR to it. And we have no insight into a risk adjustment for 2024. So if I had to draw sort of brackets around 2024, they would be fairly wide in terms of the expected outcome relative to what's currently on the page.
And you indicated, you referenced when this document was prepared. My understanding that was in July, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It was prior to the final risk adjustment results.
Thank you. So when you look at these totals, strike that. Let me ask it differently. When you look at data in a table like this as an actuary, why look at all of these years? Why not just look at the most recent time period to make estimates about rate cuts?
Sure. So if you're running a business, first you want to look at a longer term aggregate number, right? We don't necessarily work in 1 year increments. We're looking at a block of business over a long period of time. So that would be why we would add the summation rows at the bottom. But to compare year over year, it helps us to identify trends. Is this, we've seen losses over this time period. Is it very volatile? Are all the losses in the same direction year over year? It helps us to establish whether this is a persistent pattern or this is subject to somewhat of random noise.
So looking at this table, Exhibit 27, and the totals, what actuarial conclusions do you draw about trends and losses for MVP?
Sure. So we've included 2024 just for full transparency, which at this point, the individual market appears as if it will be profitable. But over the long-term time period, so over the 6-year period, we have experienced $38.8 million in losses. Those losses are heavy, they're very big, and they're also sustained year over year over year. So with the exception of 2020, which was heavily impacted by COVID, and the individual market for 2024, we've lost money in every single one of the years and markets. The other thing to note would be that out of that $38.8 million in losses, more than half of it, $26.9 million, has been subject to rate cuts by either L&E or the Green Mountain Care Board. So while we would still have lost money, $11.9 million without those cuts, the losses are significant in light of the cuts that have been experienced.
Thank you. So moving away from that exhibit, I want to ask you about risk margin. So what is MVP proposing for 2025 for the risk margin?
MVP is proposing 1.5% risk margin for both filings for 2025.
And what did MVP propose last year and what was approved?
Sure. MVP also proposed 1.5% last year, and that was approved by the board.
Thank you. And what's the purpose of including risk margin in the 2025 rates?
Sure. So there's a number of different purposes, but the main one is in order to help MVP sustain years where there are wild variations in claim costs, and also to bolster our reserves. So we have to keep some amount of money in surplus in order to be able to prepare for a catastrophic event. That is money that is statutorily required to be held by the company. And so the risk margin is an explicit assumption that will allow MVP, if everything goes to plan and the premium rates are exactly correct, in order to fund those reserves over time.
Thank you. I would ask you to go to Exhibit 19, please, back to Exhibit 19.
Okay.
And go to page 16. And you'll find a heading for Section 12. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
So the very first paragraph on that page makes reference to bad debt of 0.3 and a risk margin of 1.5. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
And that aligns with the table just below it that says 0.3 for bad debt and 1.5 for risk margin, correct?
That's correct.
So I want to just discuss the term of art so we're talking about apples to apples. If you see below the table in the third paragraph, can you read the up to the word consistent?
Sure. So the proposed risk margin of 1.5% is consistent.
All right. So that 1.5 is referencing the 1.5 above, which is the risk margin, correct?
That's correct.
And then if you go to page 17,
I'm there.
the first paragraph under that table, you'll
Sure.
see it says MVP's filed based CTR of 1.5%. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
And in your view, after reviewing this as an actuary, that 1.5, does that align with that table on 16 that we just talked about, the risk margin of 1.5?
Yes, I would assume that this would have said the MVP's filed base risk margin of 1.5%.
And does that align, does the table just above on page 17, that table with the bars, does that support your conclusion and why?
That's correct. The light blue bar, which is highlighted, is under the category of 1 to 1.5%. So that would be my understanding, would be that they were looking specifically, this table was looking at the risk margin.
Okay, and the bad debt, the 0.3, that's separate from that 1.5, correct?
That's correct.
So let's walk through this section. I want to ask you some questions. Go back to page 16.
Okay.
Well, first, I think we talked about it, but the second paragraph under the table, so it's the second paragraph on the page that starts MVP provided. That's about bad debt, correct?
That's correct.
And it references 0.3% for bad debt, correct?
That's correct.
And is that consistent with the 2024 rate filing?
That is correct.
And then, bear with me. I want to ask you about the historical risk margin table. You see that down below?
Yes.
What does this table show, and could you explain these amounts over the years comparing actual to expected?
Sure. So this table is for the time period of 2021 to 2023, comparing actual risk margin to expected risk margin. So the expected risk margin would be the filed risk margin in our rates less any explicit cuts to that risk margin made by either L&E or the board. And then the actual would be equivalent to the table that we just looked at over Exhibit 27. That would be our actual risk margin as experienced in those 3 years.
And how do you react to these numbers? What do they show you as an actuary?
Yeah, they show, again, continued sustained losses. The losses are fairly large in each year. We're talking 6% lower than expected, 9% lower than expected, and 10-ish% lower than expected for the 3-year time period.
Thank you. Now, the paragraph below that table, it's the last paragraph on this page 16. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that references a reasonableness check. This is something that L&E's done for a number of years, correct?
That's correct.
And it references that they looked at 377 carriers on exchange, individual and small group, correct?
That's correct.
And that's nationally?
Yes.
And would you read the last 2 sentences of that paragraph, please?
Sure. The filed CTR varied from -17% to +8%, but most often fell between 0% and 5%. The premium weighted average CTR for all carriers was filed as 3%.
And go to page 17, please. Back to page 17.
Okay.
And would you please explain what this table shows as it relates to those percentiles?
Sure. So of the 377 carriers, which we just talked about, they would all be graphed and they would be broken down into these cohorts of their risk margin. So you're looking at like 0.5% increments. And then each bar represents how many carriers would fall into that distribution. So the light blue bar, which is 1% to 1.5%, is where MVP would fall. And according to the data point just below it, it's around the 20th percentile. So if you lined up 100 people or 100 carriers, there would be approximately 20 who would be lower than MVP, and there would be approximately 80 who would be on the other side higher than MVP.
Thank you. Staying on page 17, going down to the last paragraph that says it is concerning. I want to ask you some questions about that paragraph, please.
Okay.
So what I'd like you to do is to read each sentence and then comment on it.
Sure. It is concerning that MVP has experienced consistent material losses in the last few years. However, MVP's RBC has been steadily increasing in recent years. So MVP does agree that we have experienced consistent material losses and that it is concerning. It is also true that our RBC has been steadily increasing in recent years. The RBC for MVP Health Plan takes into account not just Vermont business, but takes into account New York business. It's also not just a measure of commercial business. It's also our Medicare Advantage business in New York and Vermont. It's also our government programs, so our Medicaid Essential Plan business in New York State as well. Vermont business accounts for approximately 9% of MVP's overall business. So once again, Vermont small group and individual accounts for only 9% of MVP's overall business.
And you agree with that?
Yeah, that's correct.
In that first sentence you read, do you agree with what they said about the contrast between the losses and RBC increasing as you described it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So go ahead. I apologize for interrupting.
So L&E recognizes that this is a small part of MVP's overall business, which contributes to the increasing RBC despite consistent losses observed for the Vermont business.
So what are they saying there?
Sure. So what they're saying is that our RBC could be increasing, but because this Vermont filing is such a small portion of our business, it's possible to be sustaining even severe losses in this market while also having an increase to our RBC.
And do you agree with that? It's an actuary?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
However, actuarially sound rates are sustainable without other subsidization.
So what do you understand they're saying there, and do you agree with it?
Sure. So what they're saying here is that every market has to be priced in a vacuum, essentially. as if there were no other products that MVP were to sell for 2025. In an extreme scenario, we could exit all of our markets other than this Vermont small group and individual market. And as an actuary, we're forced to, by actuarial standards of practice, price our rates as if they were actuarially sustainable for every block of business.
Next sentence, please.
Sure. LNE notes that it is not sustainable to have long-term losses, and therefore a higher CTR could be justified.
So what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with it?
Yes, I agree with it. Actuarially sound rates should be sustainable without subsidization from other markets. If you think about it and you're running a business, if you're selling a product where you lose money continually year over year over year, you have to start to think about what is driving those losses and whether that product is something that will be sustainable for the long term.
Next sentence.
Given that a lower utilization trend assumption could also be justified, as discussed previously in this report, LNE is not recommending a higher CTR.
So what is your view on the higher CTR?
So a higher risk margin would be.
Excuse me, I misspoke. Higher risk margin. Yeah, let's focus on that.
Sure. So a higher risk margin would obviously help to shore up our reserves, would help to make this product sustainable over the long term. MVP does agree with the fact that a lower utilization trend could be justified. It would be actuarially reasonable. However, these things are all related. So what LNE is saying is that a lower utilization trend would lead to a higher chance that MVP would not be able to retain all of that risk margin that was filed.
Thank you. And would you read the last sentence, please?
Sure. LNE strongly emphasizes that reducing the CTR assumption from the filed 1.5% presents significant risk of inadequate premium rates that are not actuarially sound.
Now, in your experience as an actuary, do you actuaries choose your words carefully?
I would say that's correct.
So when you read this sentence as an actuary and read the words that are used in that sentence, could you comment on that?
Sure. So when LNE says things like LNE strongly emphasizes that reducing the CTR assumption would present significant risk of inadequate premium rates, those to me are adjectives that are necessary, but they're also greater than what has previously been spoken about MVP. So these indicate that LNE is significantly concerned, more so than in recent years, about the inadequacy of potential premium rates should the risk margin be cut.
Thank you. Please go to Exhibit 26. 26. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
Would you please identify this exhibit?
Sure. So this is MVP's updated rate increase summary table.
And would you walk us through it, please, and explain?
Sure. So this table has different scenarios or different points in time during the rate filing process, and what the rate increase has looked like during those points in time. So the first row is our initial proposal of 11.68% for individual and 9.34% for small group. So those numbers tie back to exhibits 1 and 2, which we started the morning talking about. The second row is adjusted for agreed changes from the LNE memo, which leaves individual at 14.92% and small group at 11.52%. So those tie out to the exhibits that MVP presented, where we took LNE's recommendations and plugged them into our rate filing software and determined what the agreed changes would look like. And the final row is updated budgets and agreed changes from LNE memo. And the updated budgets has an asterisk which says that MVP's best interpretation of the proposed budgets as calculated in the response to objection 7. And that increase would be 15.5% for individual and 12.39% for small group.
Okay. That objection 7, that was exhibits 24 and 25, where the board had asked us to answer questions about the various hospital budget scenarios, correct?
That's correct.
And so which scenario did MVP use in Exhibit 26 to arrive at the 15.5 and the 12.39?
Sure. So we would have used scenario A.
Okay, and scenario A was just taking the budgets as proposed by the hospitals, correct?
That's correct.
And on last Friday, July 19th, did UVM update their budget proposal?
That's correct. MVP received a letter from UVM via email that said that they were increasing their hospital budget ask, which I believe has been delivered to the Green Mountain Care Board. So this data does not reflect that change.
Okay, so Exhibit 26, the 15.5 and the 12.39 don't reflect the change by UVM that we received on Friday, correct?
That's correct.
So have you had an opportunity to crunch those numbers and include the impact of UVM's changes? And if so, what are those numbers?
Yes, so they would increase these rates by another 0.4% approximately, depending on market. So we'd be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 15.9% and 12.8% for individual and small group respectively.
So can you say those numbers again, just the totals, what you ended up with, please?
Sure, and these are approximations. I haven't put it exactly through, but it would be 15.9% and approximately 12.8%.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to ask you about administrative costs. If you go back to Exhibit 19, please. Exhibit 19.
I'm there.
A second. Go to page 13, item 10.
Okay.
So that's at the bottom of page 13, and that's the administrative cost section of the L&E individual rate filing, correct?
That's correct.
And would you tell the board what L&E found in terms of overall rate impact?
Sure.
For administrative costs?
Yes, so L&E found that the overall rate impact of our proposed administrative costs is a decrease of 0.1%.
Oh, I meant to ask you, what's the percentage roughly of premium that's attributable to administrative costs and other non-healthcare costs?
Sure. So as you can see here, administrative costs specifically are about between 5.8 and 6% of premium, including taxes and fees and filed risk margin and bad debt. This would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 7.5 to 8% of premium is non-claim expense.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to page 14, please. I want to ask about the second paragraph. It's the paragraph under the expenses table.
Okay.
So what is this looking at, please?
Sure. So L&E was comparing our 2025 assumed administrative costs on a PMPM or per member per month basis and comparing that to our 2021 to 2023 supplemental healthcare exhibits, which are a statutory filing where we have to file our admin costs for those time periods. And L&E found that our 2025 administrative cost increase is approximately 3% average annual increase from our 2023 filed supplemental healthcare exhibit to our proposed rates.
Thank you. And below that, there's a paragraph, and then there's a couple of tables going into page 15. Do you see that?
That's correct. Yes.
What is this part about, and what does it show?
Sure. So L&E undertook a similar comparison as they did on the risk margin side, where they took all of the carriers who were in individual and small group market across the country in 2024. And once again, they lined them all up in terms of their administrative cost that was built into their rates. They did it in two different ways. They did it as a percentage of premium, and they also did it as a per member per month basis. This recognizes the fact that there are different cost structures within each state. So the administrative cost might be a lower or higher percentage of premium simply because the claim cost is higher or lower in any of those markets. So once again, the light blue bar would be the bar where MVP would fall in this filing. And on the page 15 in the middle, it shows that MVP is in the first percentile among all carriers nationwide as a percentage of premium, and the 32nd percentile on a PMPM basis. So once again, just to frame that, if you lined up 100 carriers, MVP would be the first, or would have one carrier lower than them and would have 99 carriers higher than them in terms of percentage of premium. And the 32nd percentile would be MVP would have 32 carriers at or lower than them and 68 carriers at or higher than them.
Thank you. If you go to page 15 and read the sentence just above the paragraph numbered 11.
L&E considers the assumed 2024 administrative costs to be reasonable and appropriate.
Now, as you read this in your familiarity with the filings, is that 2024 a typo? Should it be 2025 in your view?
The tables that are above are based on 2024 data, but yes, I would assume that this would be 2025 administrative costs to be reasonable and appropriate.
And are you of the opinion as an actuary that our administrative costs referenced in these filings are reasonable and appropriate?
Yes.
Would you please go to exhibits 17 and 18? Let me know when you're there.
I am there.
So we had previously identified these there in evidence. Exhibit 17 is the letter from DFR to Chair Foster dated July 12th regarding solvency for the individual filing. And then exhibit 18 is the same letter on the small group filing dated July 12th. Did I identify those correctly?
That's correct.
And you've reviewed these letters and are familiar with them, correct?
Yes, I have.
And are the letters identical in substance with the exception of a reference to small group versus a reference to individual?
Yes, they are.
So if you go to exhibit 17 on the first page, you'll see a heading summary of opinion. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
And would you read that sentence, please?
Sure. The proposed rate filed by MVP Health Plan would not negatively impact its solvency, and the company otherwise meets Vermont's financial licensing requirements for a foreign insurer.
And would you agree, in your actuarial opinion, as of the date of this letter, July 12th, 2024, that the rate increases proposed as of that date did not adversely impact the solvency of MVP Healthcare, Inc.?
Yes, the rate increases as proposed would not impact MVP's solvency.
And since that time, MVP's proposed rate has changed, increased to 15.89% individual and 12.81 small group as presented in evidence today, correct?
That's correct.
So in your opinion, will MVP's proposed rates at this hearing as amended by the hospital budgets adversely impact the solvency of MVP Healthcare, Inc.?
The rates as proposed would not impact MVP's solvency.
As proposed here in the hearing with the updated hospital information, correct?
That's correct.
Is there anything else you'd like to comment on as it relates to solvency? And please answer that question, then I have another one for you.
Okay. MVP would like to comment on the fact that both DFR and LNE have commented on Vermont's relatively small proportion of MVP Health Plan's total business. MVP recognizes that there is great uncertainty in the market, including the solvency of other insurers. That is public knowledge. So MVP would like to note that while this filing does not necessarily impact MVP's solvency at this moment, things can change very quickly. And if MVP were to take on a significant portion of the individual or small group market, we would go to the business would become a much larger portion of our overall MVP health plan business and could, if the rates were inadequate, present problems for MVP's long-term solvency.
And this testimony you just provided about Exhibit 17 and solvency, that would apply equally to Exhibit 18 for the small group, correct?
That's correct.
Bear with me. Hearing Officer Barber, I'm wondering, I'm about to pivot to the non-actuarial issues, whether you'd like to take a 5-minute break now or whatever you deem appropriate.
Yeah, no, you read my mind. I think now would be a good time. So, Ms. Morales, if we could go off record, we're going to take a 5-minute break, come back at 9:48.
Okay, we're off the record at 9:43 a.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Owen, I'm just checking. Are you with us? I don't see you on camera.
I'm sorry, hearing officer, did you ask for the reporter or?
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
No, I was asking about Chair Foster. Let's
Oh,
just get.
okay, I didn't hear that part.
Right. Oh, there you are. You ready to go back on record, Gary? Okay. Let's go back on record, please.
I'm sorry, he's muted. We are back on the record at 9:50 a.m.
Thank you. You can pick back up, Mr. Carnegie.
Thank you very much. Yes. Eric, you're on mute. Can you unmute?
Sure. Can you hear me
I know
okay?
that. Yeah, I can hear you fine. I know this is your first time. You're doing great. Doing great. So we're going to pivot now to non-actuarial issues, please. Would you please go to Exhibit 16?
I'm there.
Let me know when you're there.
I am.
And this is your pre-filed testimony, correct?
That's correct.
And if you would go to page 7, please, of that exhibit.
I am there.
And there's a question there. Would you read question 21?
Question 21 says, what steps has MVP taken to lower costs and establish that its proposed rates promote affordability, access to care, and quality of care for Vermonters?
So there's 3 items there that it's asking about, correct?
That's correct.
And then in the answer, there's a list of items that goes up to 18, correct?
That's correct.
And so all those items would respond to the question of promoting affordability, access to care, and quality of care, correct?
That's correct.
And then if you look at that list in turn, it makes references to other Q&As, correct?
That's correct.
And those follow in your pre-file, correct?
That is true.
So I'd like to walk through some of these items with you and have you provide color and greater detail on the Q&A. All right?
Okay.
Let's start with Q22. Let me know when you're there.
I am there.
So I want to expand this question slightly. How has telehealth affected access to health care and quality of care and affordability?
Sure. So MPP has rolled out telehealth through our mobile app, GIA. We've seen a great increase in the utilization of telehealth services. I mean, as I say in my pre-file testimony, it's gone up from 2020 to 2023, 143%. And if you think of 2020 as a baseline where many of us couldn't see our doctors for months, that's actually a fairly sizable increase off of, we'll say, the middle of COVID levels. Telehealth has greatly increased access to care and quality of care. I use the example at myself as a parent. It's very unnerving when you wake up in the middle of the night and your child is spiking a fever. And my wife and I both look at each other and say, well, what do we do? Who do we call? You know, neither one of us are doctors. Do we go to the ER? How can we handle this? So using that example, telehealth has greatly increased both access to care and quality of care. We've been able to access doctors. People can access doctors in the middle of the night, 24/7. They can access doctors even if they're in the most rural parts of Vermont, provided they have internet access. They're able to very quickly be able to access a provider and get the care that they need. That care is also the care that is tailored to them. So that greatly increases the quality of care, right? We can go to the GIA app and say, do I really need to go to my primary care for this? Do I need to go to the ER for this? That telehealth is able to work as a triage, effectively funneling care to the place where it will be the best care for the member. It also greatly increases affordability. We do think of some of the visits are increasing cost in terms of people are utilizing telehealth and then saying, oh, well, I have to go to the ER anyway. But what we've seen is that telehealth can and does reduce the amount of care that's utilized at places which is more expensive. And that's tremendously important, not just for the ultimate premium rates, right? Every dollar that is not spent in claim expense is a dollar that reduces premium rates, but it's also helpful for people with out-of-pocket expenses. So you think of somebody who has a deductible or somebody who has a very high ER copay. They want to avoid that ER visit at all costs, provided they don't absolutely need to go. So this telehealth has greatly increased all three statutory criteria for MVP.
Thank you. Let's go to Q23, please.
Okay.
And again, I want to expand this slightly. How does MVP promote affordability, access, and quality care by encouraging strong relationships with PCPs?
Sure. So MVP has really identified the primary care doctor as the person who is closest to the member. They know them the best. They have the best access to all of their medical records. They understand the unique needs of that person. So when we talk about trying to have strong relationships with the PCP, it greatly increases the member's quality of care. They're not going to a doctor who doesn't know them, has never seen them before. They're able to go to their PCP and say, look, I've had this condition for a long time. What should I do? That PCP, based on their medical history, might be able to say, well, maybe we could solve this with diet and exercise, or maybe you need to go see a specialist, or maybe we can just solve this with physical therapy, for an example. So that PCP working as really the first line of defense in terms of a member's health is greatly increases the member's quality of care that they receive. It also greatly increases access. We've seen many PCPs who are able to work, help a member navigate through the health system. The member doesn't feel like they're alone, and certainly MVP helps with that. But we also have identified the primary care physician as the one who's able to better help members get through the system and find the exact care that they need. The PCP also promotes affordability because they help the member to triage in a similar way that the telehealth system does, right? If a member goes to the PCP and says, hey, we can manage this with a weight loss program or a diet change or nutrition, that's a win for the member because it reduces costs, and it's a win for MVP because it reduces our medical expense, which ultimately will reduce the premium. So MVP really feels strongly in terms of PCPs are an integral part of the care management process, and they help in all three lines of statutory criteria in order to improve the lives of our members.
Does MVP align their fees to increase access for PCPs, to PCPs? Excuse me.
Sure. So certainly the fees are not aligned 100%, and that's due somewhat to the nature of specialists having to perform services that might be more complex, or for members that might have more significant care needs. But MVP has worked over the past few years to increase and align our primary care fee schedules to reflect the fact that we value primary care doctors as an important part of the healthcare system.
Let's go to Q26, please. 26. Would you please expand upon the question of MVP's case management programs creating efficiencies to improve affordability, quality, and access to care?
Sure. So you can really break our case management programs down into a couple of different buckets. The first bucket being management for chronic conditions. So you think about somebody who has asthma or COPD or diabetes, things that they're managing on their own, but they could utilize somebody to help better manage that condition. And then we also think of the other bucket would be like complex acute cases. So you think of like end-stage renal disease or certain types of cancer. One where it's really critical that somebody is helping the member to organize all of their care to get them the right care at the right time and the care that they need. So in terms of case management program, they increase affordability because they help the member to identify services that are specifically necessary in order to treat the conditions that they have. So in terms of chronic condition, we might say, hey, you may not need to go see this specialist for this condition if it can be managed by MVP's weight management program or MVP's nutritional program that we can help you with. On the other hand, the complex cases, right? Many times these members are going to see many different specialists, many different services. There's sort of options in terms of treatment, and we want the members to get the treatment that is right for them, that also is the lowest cost treatment that will provide quality outcomes for them. So in terms of quality, we think of the member getting the best care that they need, and the case managers help with developing a plan alongside of these members to help them develop that care. So they're greatly increasing the member's quality of care. They're saying to the member, hey, look, this is the plan that we think is right for you. And they're getting the member's buy-in, and therefore together they can help to drive ultimate health, which is the goal. And then they help to provide access to care. I mean, as I said before, in terms of primary care physicians, but it's also true for our case managers. They're helping members navigate the system. They're helping members to say, oh, you need this service? Well, let's go to this physician down the street. Or if you can go, there's another physician a half an hour, 45 minutes away that might be cheaper, that might be better suited to help with your condition. So MVP's case managers are really this sort of navigator that's helping members walk through whatever condition they're facing.
Thank you. Going to Q27, I want to expand it slightly. What steps does MVP take to manage costs and contracts to improve affordability, quality, and access to care?
Sure. So as I say in my pre-final testimony, MVP engages in a competitive bidding process whenever we're exploring the utilization of a new vendor. That vendor might be for IT services, or that vendor might be for, case management services. We have this competitive bidding process, but a major part of that competitive bidding process is not just who is the lowest cost vendor. We've recognized that may not provide the best outcomes for our members. So part of that competitive bidding process doesn't just say who's the lowest cost, who will promote the most affordability. It also says who will get the job done the best, right? If we're installing a new ESRD case management program, right? Will they truly increase the member's quality of care that they receive? Will they be able to help the member increase their access to the dialysis centers that they need? So MVP is working through these cost-effective contract negotiations and competitive bidding process, but it's not just a race to the bottom, right? We're also taking into account quality and access to care in that decision-making. I specifically said we might look at information technology, IT vendors as a big part of that. MVP internally has also worked on our lean initiatives where we've said we want to try to cut out as much inefficiency as possible within the system, right? We've determined that inefficiencies cost the company money, which ultimately leads to higher premium rates. Inefficiencies also can disrupt members' care, right? If you think about a manual process that might be rife with error, and nobody wants their health insurer to make an error either on their behalf or not on their behalf. It increases the uncertainty of the health insurance that we provide. So MVP has undertaken this lean initiatives to try to remove inefficiencies out of processes, to try to increase automation and stay away from manual processes. So we recognize that healthcare is moving so rapidly in terms of information technology, and while we may have to spend slightly in our administrative expense in order to increase that, we ultimately view those investments as a win for the consumer over the long term. Will lead to lower premium rates, will also lead to increases in access and quality of care.
Thank you. Would you please go to Exhibit 12 and let me know when you're there?
I'm there.
So this was a response to an objection letter from the board. And item number 1 on page 1 makes reference to a well-being reimbursement program. Do you see that?
Yes.
Would you please tell the board about that and how it promotes affordability, quality, and access to care?
Sure. So MVP's well-being reimbursement program is offered on all of our non-standard plans within the small group and individual marketplace. It's not offered on our standard plans due to some federal regulations, but on our non-standard plans, MVP has revamped the well-being reimbursement program over the past couple of years, and we now offer up to $600 per subscriber per year to be reimbursed. So the member will submit, whether it's an online, it's a paper claim, they can mail it to us, they can email it to us, we can receive it electronically. They say, here's my receipt for the thing that I've purchased, and you can they can get reimbursed for it. MVP recognizes that health is not just the health care that you receive that MVP pays for directly, right? Our health oftentimes starts at our decision making, even before we've gone to the doctor. It's also heavily influenced by stressors in our life. It's heavily influenced by any number of what we call comorbidities. And so MVP has increased the different categories that fall into this well-being reimbursement in order to account for that. So I'll use the mind and spirit category, for instance. MVP will reimburse for stress reduction classes or mindfulness apps. We'll reimburse for things that we have identified, while they may not be true healthcare claims cost, they are certainly integral in a member managing their health and ultimately becoming healthier. This well-being reimbursement program stays true to the fact that we want our members to be healthy, not necessarily to receive as much care as possible. Ultimately, if our members are healthier, their premium rates are lower, and everybody wins. So we've undertaken this well-being reimbursement program. We've revamped it in order to include not just explicit things that you might think of in terms of your health, but truly focusing on the entire person and their entire well-being.
Thank you very much. Would you please go back to Exhibit 16, your pre-filed testimony, and go to question 29, and let me know when you're there. Question 29.
I'm there.
So this is a question about use of current technology to manage costs and improve affordability, access to care, and quality of care. Would you please expand on this?
Sure. So as I've spoken previously, we have our GIA mobile app, which is our members' primary way of accessing the telehealth for their MVP plan. It also contains a bunch of information in terms of who they can go see for doctors, managing their care, what their deductible, co-insurance, co-payments are. We've identified the fact that we're all moving towards this mobile society. I do very little on my computer anymore that's outside of work, and mostly everything is in terms of an app. So MVP has rolled out this app that will help people access the care that they need and really help them to, we've talked about access and quality and affordability. This makes it as easy as possible to access all of these different pieces of the healthcare system so that it may drive all of those categories. MVP still has our website, however. We recognize that some people do still utilize the website. And in particular on our website, we have this shop for a plan tool. We have cost transparency tools. So these are things where MVP has recognized that people want access, not just access in terms of providers, but also access in terms of data, access in terms of understanding how much things are going to cost. We're continuing to increase our ability in allowing members to look at those costs prior to receiving a service. There's no panacea that will make it so that a member will know with 100% certainty what they're going to pay for when they go in to receive a service, but we're working towards that. And these cost transparency tools have really helped us to also drive members towards quality providers. So when you go into the cost transparency tool and you look up, for instance, an MRI, I need to get an MRI, you will see the cost of that MRI for many different providers. You'll also see a quality stamp on some of those providers, which will say MVP certifies that this provider is of supreme quality. And that is another data point that a member can take into account. All of these tools are really helping the member to take initiative in terms of their care and help find the care that is right for them.
Thank you. Moving on to Q30, how does MVP increase affordability, access, and quality of care by helping lower the cost of premiums for subscribers? Could you explain that, please?
Sure. So MVP, there are really two areas, particularly for individual insurance, where MVP is working to increase affordability by lowering the cost of premiums. And both those are statutorily required. They're part of the Federal Affordable Care Act. So certainly MVP is not unique or alone in helping to drive these, but we are a partner in trying to help reduce the cost of premiums as much as possible. So the first one of those two tools is the cost sharing reduction program. So cost sharing reduction allows members who are of lower income to receive discounts on their services that they get. So they're lower deductibles, lower out-of-pocket maxes, lower copays and coinsurances. That program was not funded after 2017 by the federal government. So MVP, along with partners at DEVA, DFR, the Green Mountain Care Board, Blue Cross, have all developed a silver loading strategy, which will help to make sure that the members receive the benefit of those cost sharing reductions without having to take on the added cost of the federal government defunding them. So this has been driven through increases to the advanced premium tax credit, which is the other piece of the puzzle here. So the advanced premium tax credits are, once again, premium tax credits that are given to lower income individuals. You can see up to 500% of the federal poverty level. And effectively what these premium tax credits do is they cap a member's premium rate as a percentage of their income, and that's on a sliding scale. So lower income will pay a lower percentage of their income in premium. And then it builds this tax credit. So it says you will not pay, if you pick the specific plan that it's designed for, you will not pay more than this percentage of your income in terms of premium. But it also gives members choice. It also allows them, for instance, this year, we'll see members up to 400% of the federal poverty level will be able to get a bronze plan design for free. So certainly we don't want all of our members buying bronze plan designs with the high deductibles that come along with them. But if there are individuals who are younger and healthier and say, I can withstand a higher deductible, I have a unique financial situation, they can, for instance, buy down to that bronze plan and get it for free. They can also buy up in terms of somebody who might need more complex care. They can get a platinum plan or a gold plan for cheaper than what they otherwise would be able to. So these increase affordability very obviously, right? Because we're reducing premiums, we're reducing out-of-pocket expenses for the members, but they also increase access to care and quality of care. So, we've seen the state has published health surveys where there is a non-zero percentage of people who are deferring care because they feel like they can't afford it. And MVP doesn't want to see that. It doesn't help the system at all. It doesn't help in terms of managing that person's care. That person will ultimately likely have to incur, excuse me, greater claim costs down the road because they've deferred that care one time. So this is when we design the system and maximize the way in which the system works, it helps not just drive access to care, quality of care, it drives affordability as well.
Thank you. Going to Q31, you explain the implemented fixed prospective payments and how work on that is used to increase affordability, access, and quality of care.
Sure. So MVP has partnered in some talks in developing Vermont's application for the CMS Ahead model, which will institute fixed prospective payments for Vermont hospitals. My understanding is that the state of Vermont was chosen for that Ahead model, so MVP will continue to partner in those discussions. Fixed prospective payments for Vermont hospitals will move away from what is the so-called fee-for-service model of care, where a hospital provides a service, they bill MVP for that service, and then they are paid for that service. And it will help align, for instance, conditions. So the hospital might get paid for a certain condition. They might get paid a global budget for the members that they are expected to see within a given time frame. So it helps the hospitals to partner in with the insurance companies in reducing the amount of utilization that is inherent within the system. It helps the hospital to work within a given budget, have some financial skin in the game in order to decrease costs overall.
Thank you. Going to Q33, what's the main driver of the cost of health insurance?
Sure. So the main driver of the cost of health insurance, as I've stated before, only 7 to 8 cents of our premium dollar is costs that are truly controlled by MVP and are truly to fund MVP specific services. You think of our administrative services, you think of paying taxes, you think of funding our reserves. The other 92 to 93 cents of every dollar goes towards paying claims, which include medical claims, include pharmacy claims. over 45% of healthcare costs are incurred through hospitals that are under the Green Mountain Care Board jurisdiction. So these are significant portions of the premium rate. I would say the overwhelming portion of the premium rate is driven by medical costs.
Thank you. How do stack, going to Q35, excuse me, Q35. I just want to broaden the question slightly. How do stack deductibles impact the affordability and access and quality of care of health insurance?
Sure. So I will first describe what stacked, or we call them embedded deductibles, are. If you think of a normal health insurance plan, you think of, I have a deductible. Well, that's usually the deductible listed is for a single contract. For a family contract, the deductible is some multiple of the single deductible. So most of our plans in Vermont are 2 times. So if your single deductible is $2,000, your family deductible is $4,000. So those can be a significant barrier for families in particular families which have one member within the family who has complex health needs. They have to incur $4,000 worth of claims, in my example, before they receive any sort of coverage. So MVP has identified this and has moved towards more embedded deductibles within our health plan, which an embedded deductible is, we still have that family deductible overall, but each individual member would be capped at that single deductible. So what that would mean for my family in my example is the family's deductible is $4,000, but every individual member only incurs $2,000 worth of claims before they hit the second part of their coverage. These stacked deductibles, it is true that they do increase premiums slightly because the carrier is covering more of the health care than we otherwise would if it was just what we call an aggregate deductible or a true family deductible. But it increases affordability on the member level. So we've identified that there are families that are in these situations, right, where they have one member who has significant health needs. And we don't want, again, the cost to be a barrier to receiving care. So by developing these embedded deductibles, it may be overall an increase to the premium for the services. But for the individual families who need the care and who are facing huge medical bills, we don't want them to not be able to afford that. So while it decreases affordability on a macro level, it certainly increases affordability on a micro level. And that obviously increases quality and access to care as well, right? We don't want a member to say, I can't get this service or I can't get this procedure performed for my son or daughter because I can't afford it. That's not access to care, that's anti-access to care. And it doesn't promote quality because it will ultimately lead to worse outcomes down the road.
Thank you. If you go to Q36, please. What drives the costs of MVP's metal plans and how does that impact affordability, access, and quality of care?
Sure. So first, to just set out what the metal plans are. So these are federal guidelines. We have to make sure that our plan designs fit within a calculator that is published by the federal government. And they say that in general, what is called a bronze plan would be 60% actuarial value, silver is 70, gold is 80, and platinum is 90. Now, actuarial value is essentially how much of the claim cost is covered by the insurer versus covered by the member in terms of their out-of-pocket costs. So a platinum plan, for example, 90% AV means that 90 cents of every claim dollar is taken on by the insurance company as incurred claim expense, and the other 10 cents is paid by the member through deductibles, coinsurance, copay, and their out-of-pocket max, all the way down to 60, to a bronze plan where 60% is covered by the company, 40% is covered by the member. So within these buckets, we have to fit very neatly within these actuarial value ranges. So just to use an example, our platinum plan has to fall between 88% AV and 92% AV. So there's significant limitations in terms of the federal guidance and how we can structure our plans in order to provide for our members. There are plan designs that we could explore that would be more beneficial to our members. However, we can't do them because of these guidelines that are put in place. So that certainly impacts access to care and quality of care, if we can't get the members, if we can't tailor the coverage to the members in some sense, then that will lead to adverse outcomes.
Thank you, Eric. Eric, would you go to Q38, please? I think we've already talked about this. I just want to clean up the record. See the answer to 38. There's a paragraph number 2 or a clause number 2, and it says increasing commercial process. Do you see that?
Yes.
Should that word be prices?
I would agree with that. Yes.
Great. If you would then go, please, bear with me, to Q40. Q40 is what venues other than the insurance rate review process are better suited to address affordability, access to care, and quality of care. Would you please answer that?
Sure. So we've identified a couple of places where these statutory criteria might be better or might be more impacted. One of those is the product design process. So as I just talked about, our products are having to fall very neatly within these meta levels. But just to go over the timing of that, in late 2024, late 2023, early 2024, January, February, we have to come up with our plan designs for 2025. We have to develop them with this calculator in mind. Then we have to submit those first to the Green Mountain Care Board for approval, particularly if we're trying to increase cost sharing on any one particular service above a threshold. We then have to file those with the Department of Financial Regulation. They have to be approved in terms of here are the types of services that are going to be covered, make sure everything is statutorily in order. We also have to file those with the federal government. So by the time we get to our premium rates in May, and now sitting here at the hearing in July, many of those product designs have already been designed, they've already been approved. All of this stuff has already been baked into the cake, as it were. So MVP really feels like doing any sort of product changes or cutting things or trying to talk about affordability now, those discussions should be had in the product design process where we can better design products that will ultimately be beneficial to the members, will increase the access to care, quality of care, and affordability. The other one is the hospital budget system. I mean, as I said earlier, we don't know necessarily what the hospital budgets will be for 2025 prior to setting our rates and even prior to having the rates approved. MVP feels like the overall cost drivers in terms of hospital care that are for the hospitals under the Green Mountain Care Board jurisdiction, managing the cost of that care is better suited for the hospital budget process. We've identified the hospital budgets are approved, and unfortunately, because of how they're approved and the nature by which they're approved, those rate increase percentages often start as the floor of a negotiation rather than the ceiling. So it's difficult for MVP, and there's limited amount of leverage to go and reduce claim costs below what has already been set by the Green Mountain Care Board during their hospital budget process.
Thank you. And I have just that was really helpful, but I have a straight question. You talked about the product design process. Is DIVA involved in that as well, or am I mistaken?
Yes, in some sense, yes.
In what sense?
They have to also approve the plan designs that are filed, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Going to Q44, how does Vermont Health Connect define the term affordable?
Sure. So if you go to the Vermont Health Connect website, they determine whether a plan is affordable based on how much of a person's income is required to pay for the lowest cost plan.
So is it fair to say that website in Vermont Health Connect looks at it on a case-by-case basis based on the individual or the family?
That's correct.
And are there certain federal poverty levels that come into play?
Yeah. So, in determining what plan is affordable, that criteria has already largely been set by the federal government in terms of their premium cutoff points for their advanced premium tax credits. So when For instance, when we say whether a plan is affordable or not, that has already largely been taken out of our hands in terms of what is set by the federal government.
And then the state of Vermont has stepped in and also provides subsidies, correct?
That's correct.
Then there's subsidies, well, just generally speaking, Medicare and Medicaid help folks pay for their healthcare costs, correct?
That's correct.
Going to Q49. Almost done. I appreciate your patience. This is about COVID related services in 2025. Can you tell the board about that?
Sure. So assumptions that are specifically related to COVID within our 2025 rate filings. We do have to decrease our costs slightly for the unwinding of the public health emergency. So certain services that were previously covered in full by the insurance carrier are now covered by the member. The other big change is that back in the fall of 2023, insurers have been required to start paying for the ingredient costs for COVID vaccines. So we did make an assumption that the cost of a COVID vaccine for 2024 and 25 will increase from $40 to $140 to capture that ingredient cost. So there are some moving pieces in terms of COVID that's still in our rate filing. However, these are ultimately relatively small in terms of the overall premium rate increase.
Thank you. So I'd like to step away from your pre-filed testimony and ask you about cost shifting. If you could explain that issue to the board and give an example.
Sure, I will do my best to try to explain it. So if you are a hospital, you need a certain amount of revenue to perform all of the services that you need to do. Right, so you think about having to pay your nurses and your doctors. You think about having to increase your technology, pay for medical devices and implants and those sort of things. That pool of money comes from many different sources. It comes from the commercial the commercial carriers who are paying claims. It comes from CMS in the Medicare program, and it comes from the state of Vermont in the Medicaid program. So that revenue is coming from all the different sources. And unfortunately, not all of those sources have the same ability to negotiate their rates with the hospital, or the hospital doesn't have the same ability to negotiate the rates with each of those different pieces. So CMS largely says, here's what we're going to pay for a given service next year. Medicaid says, here's what we're going to pay for a given service next year. And if the revenue achieved from those services is not sufficient to cover the cost of those services, then the hospital needs to get that money from somewhere. And it ultimately falls to the one place where the rates can be negotiated, and that is with the commercial ratepayers. So to give you a perfect example of this, there was a hospital this year in their proposed hospital budget, and I won't name the hospital here. They said that our commercial rate increase was going to be X. But since then, Medicaid has said that they will not pay any more for a service in 2025 than they did in 24. Their increase will be 0. Therefore, we now need to request X plus 2%. I'm not sure the exact numbers, but it's a statement that comes right out and points out this cost shift, which is basically if Medicare and Medicaid don't increase their payments with what the hospital incurs in terms of costs, they have to get that money from somewhere else, and it ultimately falls to the commercial insurers.
Thank you. Now I'd like to just shift to the last section, which is to walk through the statutory criteria with you as we do each year.
Okay.
So MVP's proposed rate is modified by your testimony and other evidence for individuals of 15.89 and small group of 12.81%, which includes the hospital budgets increases, if approved by the board. Are those two amounts actuarially sound and reasonable?
They are.
So let's go through the particulars. And I'm referencing both filings when I ask you these questions. Okay, Eric?
Okay.
Based on the rate filing, other evidence, and your testimony today, that all support a conclusion by the board that MVP's rates meet the standard of affordability, correct?
They do. That's correct.
Does the rate filings, other evidence in your testimony today support a conclusion by the board that the rates promote quality of care and access to health care?
They do.
Do the rate filings, other evidence in your testimony today support a conclusion by the board that the MVP rates are not unjust, unfair, inequitable, misleading, or contrary to law?
They do.
Are the rates reasonable based on the data that we have?
Yes, they are reasonable.
Are the rates actually sound and fairly charged premium for services covered?
Yes, they are actually sound.
Are the rates excessive, inadequate, or unfairly discriminatory?
No, they are not.
Are the rates reasonable relative to the benefits that are offered?
Yes, they are.
Do they provide for payment of claims, administrative expenses, taxes, regulatory fees, and have reasonable contingency or profit margins?
They do.
So they are adequate?
They are adequate.
Do the rates exceed the rate needed to provide for payment of claims, administrative expenses, taxes, regulatory fees, and reasonable contingency and profit margins?
No, they do not.
So they're not excessive?
Correct. They are not excessive.
Do the rates result in premium differences among insureds with similar risk categories which are not permissible under applicable law and do not reasonably correspond to differences in expected costs?
They do not.
So they're not unfairly discriminatory.
Correct. They are not unfairly discriminatory.
Thank you. So LNE is proposing, the evidence shows, an increase in the proposed rates that MVP proposed, right?
That's correct.
And there's no actuary who's, based on the evidence, what's in evidence as of this moment, there's no actuary supporting cuts in the MVP proposed rates this year, correct?
That's correct.
Would you agree with me that the statutory criteria we just went through are all interrelated?
I would.
And as an actuary, would you agree you shouldn't silo the criteria?
Yes, I would agree.
Any adjustment for a rate increase for whatever reason all feed into the final number, correct?
That's correct.
Is it important that the final number is actually sound and reasonable?
Yes, it is important.
In this case, the 15.89 for individual and the 12.81 for small group. In your opinion, do those proposed rates provide sufficient? Are they sufficient for the board to conclude that MVP has met its statutory criteria along with the evidence?
Yes, I believe they're sufficient.
If the board cuts the final number on non-actuarial grounds, is there a risk that the rate would no longer be adequate?
Yes, there is a risk the rate would no longer be adequate.
MVP has had losses over the past few years, correct?
That's correct.
Are continued losses in Vermont small group and individual products sustainable?
No, they're not sustainable.
Do regional not-for-profit plans need to remain profitable in order to serve the communities they live in?
Absolutely.
That's all the questions I have at this time.
Okay, Mr. Becker, do you need a minute or you ready to?
I think I'm ready.
Okay, then go ahead.
Witnesses. Yep. Okay. So hi, Mr. Bachner. It's good to meet you.
Hello.
Hi. So this is your first year testifying in one of these hearings, it sounds like.
Yes, I've been in attendance for a couple of them, but my first year testifying.
Okay. Well, this is only my second year doing these hearings myself, and I was only in attendance at one beyond that. So we're both still relatively new to these hearings, at least. Okay. I have quite a bit of ground I want to cover with you. Quite a bit of it is technical, as you can imagine. I'm also going to try to run through some calculations with you. We'll see how that goes. I'll do my best to direct you to the relevant exhibits using, the MVP binder that you have and using the red Bates stamp numbers at the bottom of the pages that you're familiar with. But if you're ever not sure what I'm referring to or what I'm asking, please let me know.
Okay.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So to start, if I could have you turn to Exhibit 15, Bates, page 10. Page 10. Let me know when you get there.
I am there.
Okay. So this document is MVP's 2023 supplemental healthcare exhibit. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so just very generally, what kind of information is contained in this document?
Sure. So I do want to say this is, I may have said MVP Healthcare. This is MVP Health Plan specifically. So one of the companies that is under MVP Healthcare jurisdiction. But this document contains, for the year 2023, information on premiums, claims, some administrative expense, and then underwriting gain and loss, and some other information about the number of lives that are covered, and some other information.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So, and the first 3 pages of this exhibit, so that's New York, the MVP's business in New York. Is that accurate? If you look on the left, left
Yes.
of the page. Yeah. Okay.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, the
Yeah.
first 3 pages are for New York. Correct.
Okay. And then the next 3 pages, that's 13 through 15. Are those specific to MVP's business in Vermont?
Correct.
Okay. And then the final 3 pages, 16 through 18. These are MVP's entity-wide numbers, right? So that would be essentially New York and Vermont being added together?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. So then if I could have you turn to page 17, and the vertical text on the left side of the page, what does that say?
It says supplemental 2 16.2 grand total.
Okay, grand total. So then this is the entity-wide data we were talking about, the New York and the Vermont added together, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So now row 13, could you tell me what number is found in row 13? What the label is for row 13?
Sure. Row 13 is net investment and other gain/loss.
Okay, so the numbers reported in this row are MVP's entity-wide investment gains or losses. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay, and so just so I understand, MVP as a company has investments, like a person, like you or I would have investments. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay, and some years MVP makes money on its investments, and some years it might lose money on its investments. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay. So for 2023, if I could have you read the number from column 15, which is labeled total.
Sure. So that number is 13,436,184.
Okay. So in 2023, MVP is reporting that it made 13.4 million on its investments entity-wide. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So MVP's business in Vermont, we've already heard some testimony about this, that it's not a very large share of MVP's business. Do you know the figure off the top of your head of what percent of premiums come from Vermont? And if not, I can point you to an exhibit where it says.
I think it was around 9%. That's quoted in Eleni's memorandum.
That's correct. Yep. So, and here's one of the calculations I want to run through. So 9% of 13.4 million. I could tell you what I arrived at, or would you prefer to attempt, do you have a calculator? I don't know.
I don't have a calculator. I mean, I can estimate it. Or if you'd like an exact number, I can do that.
So what I did is I did 9% of 13.4 million. I didn't do the whole number. I rounded it to 13.4, and what I got was 1.2 million. Does that sound?
That sounds reasonable. Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, if I could have you turn back to Exhibit 15, page 14. And the vertical text on the left side of the page that says, what does that say here?
Supplemental 2 16.2 Vermont.
Okay, so if you go to row 13, column 15, what is the total amount of investment gains or losses listed for Vermont?
That would be 0.
Okay. So could we assume then that the entire 13.4 million in investment gains and losses is allocated to New York in this exhibit? And we can I can direct you to page 11 where that number is found if you'd like to just verify that.
No, yes, I can see that. That is correct based on this filing.
Okay. So back to page 14, the Vermont numbers, row 15. What is row 15?
Row 15 is the net gain or loss.
Okay, so the figures in this row are what MVP reports to be their losses in Vermont in 2023, correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
And then the number in column 15 of row 15 is what?
Negative 34,763,287.
Okay, so MVP is reporting losses in Vermont in 2023 of 34.7 million. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. Had you, and it's not the case, but had you proportionally allocated, had MVP and not you probably didn't submit these financials, but had MVP proportionally allocated the investment gains to Vermont, so 1.2 million proportionally, what would MVP's losses in Vermont have been in 2023 then?
I'm going to object. I'm going to object to the question. It just it calls for speculation. He hasn't established this witness prepared this document. He's asking me to do math on the fly. So I would object to the question.
It certainly doesn't call for speculation. It calls for him to do simple mathematics. One number minus another. 34.7 million minus 1.2 million.
I stand by my objection.
Objection overruled. I agree it doesn't call for speculation. So if you could provide that number, Mr. Bachner.
Sure. So that number would be approximately $33.5 million loss.
Okay. It's still a large amount of losses, but it would have been, just a little bit smaller.
That's
okay. Now let's investigate those losses a little bit. And this exhibit, we can stay on this exhibit. In particular, we can stay on page 14. If you could go to row 11. What's in row 11?
So row 11 is the underwriting gain or loss.
Okay. And briefly, since pretty much all the figures in this row are losses, when you have an underwriting loss, does that mean you paid out more in claims than you collected in premiums?
That's correct. Underwriting loss would include administrative expense. So it would be we paid out more in claims plus administrative expense than we collected in premium.
Okay. Thank you. So column 1, that's the individual market. That's labeled individual market, correct? That's your individual group business here in Vermont?
That's correct.
And what did you report for losses in the individual market?
$3.2 million.
Okay. And column 2 is the small group. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And what was reported as losses in the small group?
$11.7 million approximately.
Okay. And in column 3, MVP reported some smallish losses in the large group. Could you read the number there in column 3?
Sure. It's approximately a $300,000 loss.
Okay. If I said to you that I added those numbers up and it was 15.2 million in losses, would you agree that that was the correct number?
That looks reasonable, yes.
Okay. So that's, is that fair to say that 15.2 million is less than half of the 34.7 million in total losses reported by MVP in Vermont in 2023?
That's fair.
Okay. Here's where things might go off the rails, but let's give it a try. Can we calculate what the losses might be on a PMPM basis? So we do have the member months at the bottom of this table in columns 1, 2, and 3. We have the member months listed for those 3 groups we just went through, right?
Yes.
And if I told you I did the math and I added up the 130,000 and the 192,000 and the 18,000 and came up with 341,166 member months, does that sound about accurate?
That sounds correct.
Okay. And so if we took the 15.2 million in reported losses in the individual, small group, and large group, and divided that by the member months, are you able to tell us what that is on a PMPM basis, or should I give you my calculation?
You can give me your calculation, or I can pull up a calculator, but
It's $44.55 per member per month.
okay, that sounds reasonable.
Okay. Now, if we could go, still on the same page, still in, we're going to go over to column 12, and I'm going to ask you to tell me what is in column 12. First of all, what is what is column 12 labeled?
Sure. So column 12 is our Medicare Advantage business, which includes Medicare Advantage Part C and also Medicare Part D standalone coverage.
Okay. And what are the underwriting losses reported in row 11 in your Medicare Advantage Part C line of business and Part D?
Approximately $19.6 million.
Okay. And is it accurate? So to say that that's 4.4 million more, roughly, that 19.6 million is 4.4 million more than the losses we identified in the individual, small group, and large group?
That's correct.
Okay. And could we attempt to do the PMPM calculation again? So we have the 19.6 million in losses, and down at the bottom of the column, is that 67,051 member months?
Yes, that's correct.
And if we were to divide those two numbers, the PMPM, if I were to tell you that that was $292.31, does that sound about right to you?
That one I would have to check. I'm not that good at my mental math, so am I allowed to confirm that?
I mean, if you have a calculator handy, I mean, Mr. Barber, Mr. Carnaby?
Yes, if you have a calculator handy, I think he's asking for a calculation, and I'm not sure that Mr. Becker's statements are evidence. So yeah, if you have a calculator, if you could pull that up, please.
Sure. I'm getting to approximately $292 on a PMPM basis.
Okay. So which of these columns on this page does the GMCB have oversight of?
So the Green Mountain Care Board has oversight of columns 1 through 3.
Okay. So that's $44.55 PMPM losses on the GMCB regulated products. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And 292 approximately, you said PMPM losses on the non-GMCB regulated products. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to shift gears here for a little bit. If you could turn to Exhibit 16.
Okay.
So this is your pre-filed testimony, is that right?
That's correct.
And we just, you just spent some time going over quite a few of these questions with your attorney. I'm not gonna, in fact, I was keeping track. There's not a lot of overlap here, which is a good thing. So quite a bit of this pre-filed testimony, is it fair to say, is contained beginning on page 7 under this heading 3, non-actuarial criteria. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. And a lot of the way, if we were to flip through here, the questions are worded, they speak to promoting affordability or increasing affordability or improving affordability. Is that the legal standard as you understand it?
Objection. The document that he's referencing and the paragraphs he's referencing don't just reference affordability. We went through that testimony at great length. So I would object to the question as framed.
I could reframe the question.
Thank you.
What is the witness, Mr. Bachner, what do you understand to be the non-actuarial rate review criteria here in Vermont?
My understanding would be that it's to promote affordability, access to care, and quality of care. Do the rates promote those things?
Okay.